All right. Hello and welcome everybody. Can you hear me okay? See me okay? Yeah, wonderful. All right. So we'll get rolling. Hi and welcome to the NOPE campaign press conference. That's the No Ontario Prison Expansion campaign, led by the Coalition Against Proposed Prisons, who are a group of organizations demanding a province-wide moratorium on prison expansion in Ontario. The NOPE campaign currently has over 50 signatories and counting, including the Toronto Metropolitan University Legal Clinic, the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, the Council of Elizabeth Fry Societies of Ontario, Thunder Women Healing Lodge Society, the HIV Legal Network, and Black Lives Matter Canada. Over the next 40 minutes, you'll hear from representatives of various organizations who have chosen to endorse the NOPE campaign, after which you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. Offering diverse perspectives and areas of expertise, these individuals will challenge the popular rhetoric around Ford's prison expansion plans, which are actually tough on taxpayers, not on crime. From the exorbitant costs of jail infrastructure projects to rising rates of pretrial detention, which are linked to the perceived need for more prison beds, to the harms of incarceration within increasingly inhumane conditions of confinement, which inevitably results in harms to the community. Finally, we will hear about alternatives to prison expansion, including investments in evidence-based policies, initiatives, and social infrastructure that will actually help to keep our communities safe. So again, we will hear from different individuals. We have a great lineup of speakers, and then we'll have a question and answer period at the end. So please do save your questions until the end. So we'll start with Justin Pichet. Justin Pichet is full professor in the Department of Criminology at the University of Ottawa and is a member of the Coalition Against Proposed Prisons. He's been doing research on prison construction and alternatives to imprisonment for 2 decades. He lives on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. Justin.
Thank you, Laura. Since taking office in 2018, the Ford government has announced plans to build 3 new prisons, expand 8 existing ones, and convert 1 youth detention center into a women's jail. The province has earmarked up to $2.7 billion just for the construction of these 12 provincial jail infrastructure projects. So far, only 210 out of the 1,601 additional prison beds the Ford government has announced have been built. The cost to build each of these new prison beds ranges from $960,000 a cost per bed for the recent expansions of the Kenora Jail and Thunder Bay Correctional Center to the $3.5 million it's costing per bed at the soon-to-be completed Thunder Bay Correctional Complex. Overall, it's costing Ontario taxpayers an average of $1.7 million just to build each of the 1,601 prison beds the Ford government has announced to date. If filled, the annual operational costs associated with these new prison beds would be approximately $214.5 million per year. This is on top of the more than $1.25 billion it already costs annually to run Ontario's provincial jail system, which mostly imprisons people awaiting trial, of which most won't be found guilty of an offense. It's also important to note that prison construction takes time. For instance, it took 26 and a half months for the Ford government to expand the Kenora Jail and Thunder Bay Correctional Center each by 50 beds. And if the 345-bed Thunder Bay Correctional Complex is completed by the fall of 2016 as currently scheduled, it will have taken the province over 9 years to complete it from the time it was first announced in May 2017. And that's without community opposition. If the 235-bed Eastern Ontario Correctional Complex, which was announced in August 2020 and faced considerable community opposition in Kemptville, gets built, it's not scheduled to be completed until November 2032. That's 12 years to erect a new prison. For a government that claims to be fiscally responsible and that claims to be interested in making communities safer today, communities making safer today, sorry, Ford's prison construction plan should strike us all as absolutely absurd, especially when we consider that we can achieve better results for less money and in less time. For instance, supportive housing projects like the Dunn House in Toronto prevent expensive forms of institutionalization of various kinds and enhance community safety by providing wraparound services for the residents who grapple with mental health conditions, drug use, and other issues. Instead of irresponsibly spending $2.7 billion to build 1,601 prison beds, the province could build 9,726 supportive housing units, similar to those at the Dunn House. With the 214.5 million it'll cost to run these 1,601 new prison beds, the province could cover the operational costs of 4,468 supportive housing units that cost an average of 131 per day, 4,000 per month, or 48,000 to run each year, which is 64% cheaper than the nearly $367 per day, $11,000 per month, or $134,000 a year it costs on average to operate a prison bed in this province. So, in closing, I ask each and every one of you, including Premier Ford and Prime Minister Carney, what kind of province, what kind of country do we want to build together? Do we want to build a province and a country that prevents violence through putting in place more basic and fiscally responsible social infrastructure, or a province and country that merely reacts to violence with never-ending budget and resource increases for policing and imprisonment that have not translated into commensurable decreases in victimization? Do we want to build a caring province and country that chooses real safety by supporting people pushed to the margins, or one that callously pushes them further to the margins and then into prison beds, old and new, that, as you'll hear from some of our speakers today, harm, injure, maim, and even kill people? Folks, we don't need political slogans and pandering. We need good public policy, fiscal responsibility, and leadership. We can do better than jail, not bail. We should build communities, not cages. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. So we'll move on to Nicole Myers. So Nicole Myers is a criminologist and associate professor in the Department of Sociology at Queen's University. She's been studying bail and pretrial detention for over 20 years, observing hundreds of days in bail court, witnessing the decision-making process for thousands of people, and conducting interviews with both justice professionals and accused people. Nicole.
Great. Thank you, Laura. The bail system is replete with problems. Keeping people in custody pre-trial isn't one of them. Our provincial jails are full of legally innocent people. There's a lot of mischaracterization circling about the problem with the bail system, and it's important that we look at the data to understand the actual nature of the problem. To be clear, Canada's bail system is the harshest it has ever been. We have never before in this country incarcerated as many legally innocent people as we do today. The most recent data indicate that in Ontario, 85.6% of the provincial jail population is in pretrial detention. This means over 8,000 legally innocent people are on remand on an average day, and less than 1,300 are convicted and sentenced to be there. The rate with which we hold people in pretrial detention has more than quadrupled in the last 40 years. Of the people denied bail in Ontario, 60 to 70% are there for non-violent offenses. We must be mindful that being accused of a crime does not make it so. In 56% of cases in Ontario, all charges against the accused person are withdrawn. This means that only approximately 42% of accused are convicted of what we said they did. We routinely punish people prior to determining their guilt. In doing so, we reduce any sentence that may be imposed post-conviction, reducing any available opportunities for rehabilitation. And this says nothing of the heavy consequences for the tens of thousands of cases that conclude with all charges being withdrawn. For many people, pretrial custody is the punishment before and often in the absence of any conviction for wrongdoing. The current system is not working well, and we can all agree that public safety is important. The provincial government is well positioned to implement measures to improve the system, not by building more jails, but by focusing on efforts to improve the operation of the court system and support people in the community. We owe it to victims of crime and our broader community to invest in mechanisms that are actually effective in reducing crime and increasing public safety. These efforts ought to be based on empirical evidence. Despite its intuitive appeal, the data are clear. Jail is not an effective way to keep communities safe, making it more, not less likely that people will commit offenses in the future. There is no empirical evidence that taking a tougher approach to bail or sentencing or increasing jail capacity will increase public safety. There is, however, strong evidence of the importance of supporting people in the community to protect against crime. The best ways to improve public safety are by investing in the community and reducing the volume of lower level offenses coming into the criminal justice system. This will allow the courts to focus on those cases that are more serious or potentially risky. For those who are released, increased investment in community supports, including housing, bail beds, supervision programs, mental health and substance use supports, an automated court date reminder system, and judicial referral hearings all show promise in helping support accused in the community and increasing compliance. There are people who may need to be detained, but there are also a lot of people who can be effectively managed in the community. There are many problems with our bail system, none of which will be addressed by making it easier to incarcerate innocent people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So we'll turn now to Vanessa. Vanessa is a mother, a poet, community activist, and a person with lived experience with the criminal justice system. She's currently doing research with Tracking Injustice to create a database to track police-involved deaths and deaths in custody. Vanessa.
Thank you. I'm going to start with sharing a poem I wrote just to give people an understanding of what it's like to be incarcerated. I wrote this about the Ottawa Correctional Detention Center, and I used the crimes that most people were incarcerated there for. I broke the law, so the law broke my spirit. I still have a voice somewhere, but now no one can hear it. I once had sanity, but now I'm nowhere near it. I unlawfully entered a dwelling, so the law unlawfully entered my brain. They took all my clothing so that we could all look the same. They took my distinguishing characteristics so that I'm just a number and a last name. They took my values and my privacy so that I have no shame. And this humiliation is the rehabilitation they claim so they could build more super jails like franchise food chains. I obstructed justice, so the law has made my path obstructed. I lost all hope since my livelihood and confidence were abducted. Now there's nothing left to do except to do what is instructed. I robbed, so the law robbed me of my optimism. I have no rights, cannot make my own basic decisions. Like an animal neglected and left to rot in these dirty prisons. They wanted to guarantee my likelihood of recidivism. I uttered false documents. The law uttered me false lines about being innocent till proven guilty and about how justice is blind. I admitted I had a problem and help is what I expected to find. But instead, I lose my freedom, lose my faith, and lose my mind. I was in the possession of illegal goods, so the law has put me in their possession. Treating me horribly, bringing me deep into depression, taking away my very existence was supposed to teach me a lesson. I caused a disturbance. The law has made me mentally disturbed. I'm no longer a person. I have no identity. My past has been blurred. I'm reduced to nothing, then kicked to the curb, expected to function in society after the inhumane treatment I've endured. I committed a crime, so the law committed me to segregation so that I could know the true meaning of helplessness and frustration, and I could experience every possible human rights violation. Their intentions were to destroy my mind and destroy my motivation, so both my physical and mental health are in state of deterioration. I breached the conditions of my probation, so the law breached my trust. They lied when they said they were here to serve and protect us. Their only goal was to fill more seats on that prison transfer bus and use cruel methods of punishment till our personalities adjust. I was publicly intoxicated, so the law gave me a very public persecution, so the media could portray me as the problem and the law as the solution. But what they don't broadcast is our prison living conditions, like a cave person pre-evolution. I failed to keep the peace because the law fails me every day. They tell me two wrongs don't make a right and crime doesn't pay, but I only become more institutionalized with every jail stay. I lose all my self-worth till I see no other way. My past prevents me from having a future, and that's supposed to be okay. I broke the law, so the law breaks me down, and all I have lost outweighs what little enlightenment I have found. Jail barely works for first-time offenders, so definitely never second, third time around. How can I learn from my mistakes when my head is chained and bound, and my fate is left in the biased hands of a judge and a crown? How could I ever hear my calling in life when they've muted the sound? How could I stay afloat in society when I've been encouraged to drown? How could I smile in the face of hard times when I spent so long in a frown? And how can I climb the ladder of success when it's planted on shaky ground? So there has been 763 deaths in custody in Ontario documented since the year 2000. I'm going to say documented because many of these deaths aren't documented, so we'll never have an accurate number. This is including 52 police deaths and 711 provincial and federal prison deaths, along with immigration, mental health, and youth detention. As we know, from 2010 to 2024, there's been 371 deaths that have occurred in provincial custody. 21% of these are drug overdoses, and there's no way of knowing how many were caused by drugs that were brought in by staff members, because that happens a lot, or the incompetence of healthcare staff giving people the wrong medication. 12.6% was death by hanging. And I'm sure the constant physical and mental abuse definitely contribute to that. 5.3 were involved use of force, like restraints, physical handling, chemical agents, tasers, firearms. And some of these are guards putting people with non-associations or gang rivalries in the same room together on purpose to see what's going to happen. Sorry. From 2010 to 2024, provincial deaths in custody are on the rise. They have increased by 205%, from 10 deaths in 2010 to an all-time high of 46 deaths in 2021. An unfortunate record has also been reached in 2024. With this overall increase underlies that while the daily average of the count of daily prisoners held in provincial custody has decreased over time, the deaths have increased. Of deaths deemed natural, after the year 2010, inquests no longer became mandatory. However, there's no natural death while in custody, because there's nothing natural about being locked in a facility where you're under constant supervision, your cries for help and your requests for medical assistance are going completely ignored. Most people who are incarcerated are criminalized for being poor, struggling with their mental health, struggling with addictions, or any combination of those three things. If you didn't struggle with your mental health before your incarceration, you certainly do upon your release. Therefore, a more realistic alternative to incarceration would be programs in the community like addiction services, mental health services, supportive and affordable housing. Jail does not rehabilitate. It causes such harm that people are coming out worse, or they're dying while in custody due to the extreme violence, physical and emotional abuse, and or severe medical neglect. So jail does not work, and if it worked, we wouldn't need to keep building more jails. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. We'll move now to Yusuf Fakiri, who's the eldest brother of Solomon Fakiri, who was jailed at the Central East Centre in Lindsay while waiting for a bed at the Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Sciences. Solomon was killed by prison officers on December 15th, 2016. Yusuf is the founder of the Justice for Sali movement. Yusuf.
Fellow Canadians, thank you very much for sharing your time with us today. My name is Yusuf Fakiri, and I'm the brother of Solomon Fakiri, the founder of the Justice for Sali movement. I'm here to, first of all, share the message with you that I support the No Ontario Prison Expansion campaign. Building more prisons does not solve our mental health crisis. Building more prisons will not save individuals such as Suleiman Fakiri or Ashley Smith or Justin Saint-Amour or Cascadis, individuals that deserve better from our system, individuals that needed to be in places where they had the appropriate care, mental health supports. Yet almost 9 years, we're approaching the 9-year anniversary of Solomon Fakiri's death. The government to this day has not acknowledged nor apologized to my family and to Solomon's beating death at the hands of correctional officers, where more than 60 policy breaches were made. There has never been criminal accountability into Solomon's death. And of the 57 recommendations that came out of Solomon Fakiri's landmark inquest, not one of the inquest recommendations have been implemented by the government. Does this mean that people with human mental health issues and challenges, their lives are cheap? Does it mean that their lives don't have the same value as the rest of us? We have to think and ask ourselves the question, why do we continue to have individuals suffering from mental health challenges to be in prison and they're given to their family and their loved ones in body bags without accountability? Solomon's inquest was an opportunity to transform the correctional system. Yet here we are today having conversation about expanding prisons. That doesn't solve the mental health crisis that we have. That will not bring back the Suleiman Fakiris or the Ashley Smiths or the Justin Saint-Amours or the Cascadis. We need people with mental health challenges to be in places and institutions where they're getting the appropriate care. So that's why I stand with you today, even though I wanted my brother's tragic death to be an opportunity for us to transform the system. Yet my family continues to fight because we don't want another family to go through what we went through. There should not be more prison expansion. There should be hospitals, more mental health institutions where there's mental health workers, psychiatrists that would help the individuals such as Suleimans or the Ashley Smiths or the Cascadis or the Justin Saint-Amours. I stand with NOPE, the no prison expansion project, and I will continue to fight for Canadians suffering from mental health challenges. This is my simple message, and we'll continue to fight for better rights for Canadians suffering from mental health challenges. Justice for Sully. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. So next up, we will hear from Les Harper. Les is Plains Cree from Saddle Lake First Nation, following in the footsteps of his father, the late Elder Vern Harper, his mother, the late Elder Pauline Shirt, and his sister, the late Elder Wanda Whitebird. Les has worked for over 30 years as an advocate for the rights of Indigenous peoples affected by the carceral system. Les.
Good afternoon. I like to say miigwech for this chance to say something here on behalf of our people and the people that are been wrongly and unjust. One of the things I'd like to say first is my outlook comes from a harm reduction base outlook. And many people have different outlooks on what harm reduction is. And many of them are right. If you believe in something that is positive, it is right, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I was taught by my late sister, Wanda Whitebird, that harm reduction is love. That's what it is. Love is something that is very important for us to have and continue to be in our lives, where the government doesn't see that as a priority. And that is something that is very important for us to realize, and that ourselves are people that have that compassion, that outlook, and it's us for us to bring that forward to uh, the general population of society. The population of Canada is 4% Indigenous. 30% of the population in prison is Indigenous. And that is something that is a far cry of understanding that something is not done right. Something is being held in a position that doesn't help that population. And it was brought out in the Truth and Reconciliation uh, uh, calls for the community-led justice for decolonization of the correctional system. And that was something that was uh, shown to us that we had it. So we have the information in front of us, what it does and what it needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. Is very clear for us on the Indigenous aspect in the correctional system. And right now with Bill 5, uh, Mr. Ford there is trying to bring that forward so people that are using drugs, that are living in encampments will be jailed for 6 months. And that is a far cry to that will just overload the correctional system that it doesn't make sense where these harm reduction places were put in place uh, uh, years ago now. And, why were they? Because they were believed that they were going to be helpful and do things that weren't being done. And so this process of bringing the things of jail bigger, bringing jails bigger, it just brings back that old outlook for since colonization started, and that has never worked for uh, people, and especially indigenous people. It's something that has been uh, tried and tried and never worked for us. It's always been a very negative and not a positive way, and not a way to grow into a place of love and understanding. And so that is something that I would just like to say uh, about that, is that love is the most important thing in and when that's how we express that harm reduction in an indigenous way, especially. Say, Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you so much, Les. Next up, we have Pam Reno. Pam is a queer, brain-injured, bilingual, Peruvian and Chilean Italian ancestry, and Disability Justice Network of Ontario's Prison Project phone line coordinator. They're also a former outreach and advocacy worker with chronically houseless folks who are between prisons, hospitals, and streets/shelters. Pam is passionate about Indigenous sovereignty, community care, and harm reduction. Pam.
Thanks. From literature reviews to firsthand consultations with prisoners and loved ones, we know that prisons are ineffective solutions to harm or long-term public safety because incarceration fails to address the root causes of crime, has negative environmental impacts, and deepens a reliance on a system that disproportionately impacts marginalized communities, criminalizes poverty, disables, kills, and perpetuates systemic violence, racism, and ableism born from colonization to control and warehouse Black and Indigenous people in particular. Prisoners experience cruel conditions and abuse of power that are charter violations of basic rights and dignity owed to every individual. While the 2023 ICIT tortures 3 days of 203 prisoners at Maplehurst Correctional Complex is the most public. It is unfortunately not an isolated incident and reflects an entrenched culture of disregard for human life that lacks institutional accountability and does not rehabilitate or reduce recidivism. Building more prisons reinforces and normalizes a violent approach to social issues that diverts public resources from investment in humane, evidence-based, and just alternatives that actually support healing, safety, and are also more cost-effective. For every $1 invested upstream, we save $7 on policing, prisons, and victim services. The Ford government has failed to create public safety by stagnating OW and ODSP rates and endorsing measures like Bill 5, Bill 6 that exacerbate the housing crisis and further criminalizes homelessness and targets Indigenous land defenders, both of which greatly impact people living with disabilities. Prison expansion is also in contradiction with recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited Folks Inquiry's 231 calls to justice. It is also in contradiction to coroners' inquests into deaths of those who have died in Ontario jails and recommendations from the Ontario Chief Coroner's Report, An Obligation to Prevent, which recommends temporary closure not expansion for inbound transfers of person in custody, either until capacity can be restored or occupancy reduced. Overcrowding could immediately be addressed by beginning to decarcerate remanded prisoners with low-level nonviolent charges and anyone there to criminalize poverty and disability. For example, people unable to afford bail, fines, housing or missed probation, court, which we saw done successfully at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Decriminalizing homelessness, encampments, drug use and possession, and sex work would also reduce crowding. Further investigation into incarceration due to the pervasive anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism in our system is required and has additionally been validated by a recent class action lawsuit regarding the province's security assessment for evaluating risk program. The TRC also calls for a transfer of resources and responsibility to Indigenous nations and communities for care, custody, and supervision of Indigenous offenders. Ultimately, investing in evidence-based community programs and services, for example, basic income, housing, healthcare, mental health and addiction support, cultural supports, places that foster a sense of belonging, like libraries, early intervention and prevention, mediation, transformative and restorative justice, grief and trauma therapy, crime prevention through environmental design, and reinstating victim and offender mediation programs and victim restitution programs will lead us to the community safety we need, not more policing and prisons, which are sites of disablement and death. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam. All right, we'll move to our final speaker. We have Andrea Vasquez Jimenez, who is the Director and Principal Consultant of Policing Free Schools. Andrea makes part of a national and international movement working on these issues with and alongside individuals and organizational partners based across Canada, the United States, United Kingdom, and South Africa. Andrea is a Master's of Education graduate from OIC. Andrea.
Thank you. We all share the same vision and goal: safer schools, safer streets, and safer communities. And the reality is that increasing and expanding police presence and prisons will not get us there. On the other hand, properly funded schools and communities and addressing the root issues will. Doug Ford does not care about school safety, street safety, or community safety. This government does not care about real safety. Just as this government does not care about or respect taxpayers' hard-working dollars. And there is a direct correlation. The Ford government chooses to opt for non-evidence-based, fiscally irresponsible and harmful measures, whether that be the banning of evidence-based and effective tool of automated speed cameras across the province, which keep people safe, especially children in school zones, whether it is the mandating of policing in schools in Ontario through Bill 33, which research is clear, policing in schools does not make educational spaces safer, and rather it has harmful impacts on students, including on student achievement, educational outcomes, and student well-being. Or expanding Ontario's jailing through several infrastructure projects towards an Ontario prison expansion, which is ineffective and continuously punishing taxpayers' pocketbooks. Policing Free Schools endorses the No on Prison Expansion initiative because research, data, evidence, and lived reality shows that we cannot prison ourselves into real safety. The Ford government continues to plummet funds into policing and carceral measures that are non-evidence-based, fiscally irresponsible, and harmful. The government knows already what the real solutions are to co-creating the conditions for real safety. And that is addressing the root issues, addressing the social and structural determinants of health and equity, including properly funding, supporting, and resourcing our schools and communities, not policing and carceral measures such as policing in schools and prisons. We know that thriving and healthy communities, including educational spaces, have ample support and resources, not more police presence or more prisons. We also know that there is more than enough funding to address the root causes, which are evidence-based and cost-effective, respectful of taxpayer dollars that would co-create real safety. Just look at the billions of dollars, billions wasted from this government's multiple scandals. You name it, Greenbelt, Thermal Spa, Ontario Place, Skills Development Slush Fund, legal costs for lawsuit losses, to name a few. All students, children, youth, educators, workers, parents, caregivers, families, and communities deserve a government who has the political will that invests into real safety and provides safer schools, safer streets, and safer communities. And that means ensuring properly funded schools, which means a needs-based funding formula. It means smaller classroom sizes, fixing our disrepaired schools, increase in education support staff, more teachers, and specialized support services such as social workers, nurses, mental health counselors, pre- and after-school programming, clean air, clean water. It means addressing and preventing adverse childhood experiences. It means addressing poverty, including legislated poverty wages. It means addressing food insecurity and housing, including bringing back rent control, mental health and harm reduction and addiction supports. It means addressing the unemployment rate, raising also the rates of ODSP and OW, to name a few. Not banning automated school safety speed cameras, not mandating policing in schools, not the expansion of prisons. This government is choosing to systematically set up students, children, and youth to increasingly fail due to a chronically underfunded education system, mandating policing in schools, the decimation of community-based supports, and pushing them towards being warehoused to fill up this government's new construction of more prison beds, ultimately further entrenching the school-prison nexus provincially. No to the banning of automated school safety speed cameras. No to the mandating of policing in schools. No to the expansion of prisons. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andre, and thank you to all of our speakers. So I'll just go over some of the key points that we've heard over the last 40 minutes for anyone who joined late. So drawing on, again, a diverse perspectives, diverse areas of expertise, as well as lived experience. We've heard from many different individuals that Ford's prison expansion plans are, in fact, not going to keep our community safe. They are not going to reduce crime and lead to safer streets, schools, and communities. We're looking at the expansion of a prison system that is already exorbitantly expensive. On average, we're looking at $1.7 million per prison bed, plus an additional operating cost of over $200 million per year. That's in addition to the current operating cost. And this is versus something like Dunn Housing, supportive housing, which is, comparatively much cheaper at only $275,000 per bed. So that's compared to 1.7 million. And again, these prisons, the Ontario provincial prisons, are mostly full of people who are remanded to pretrial detention. So 85.6% of prisoners in provincial custody are legally innocent. That's over 8,000 legally innocent people in custody on average per day. And as Nicole has noted, this is quadrupled in the last 3 decades, right? So rising rates of remand are really contributing to this perceived need for more prison beds. Again, so important to note that the majority of folks remanded to pretrial custody, the majority of folks incarcerated are there for nonviolent offenses. And again, staggering statistic, over half of the charges historically are being withdrawn or stayed. So you have, of all those folks that are there waiting sentencing, less than half will be found guilty. So we've got a system that is punishing legally innocent people before conviction. And what we've heard from Vanessa so powerfully, attesting to how this punishment of both legally innocent people and folks who have been found guilty is rather than rehabilitating, it's debilitating people, right? In Vanessa's words, a loss of freedom, faith, and mind, right? So we're looking at the exacerbation of existing physical and mental health issues. We're looking at onset of mental health issues, a closing down of people's future, the charges that follow folks into the community, the stigma, the impact on employability, on housing, on mental health, addictions, families. And as Vanessa noted, we've got over 200 deaths in custody, deaths in provincial custody in Ontario over the last 15 years. Staggering and heartbreaking. And these rates are increasing again, and that's associated with increasingly inhumane conditions of confinement, which is related to overcrowding, which again is related to the fact that we have increasing numbers of people in pretrial detention. We heard from Yusuf, the brother of the late Soliman Fakiri, who reminded us that not one inquest recommendation from this landmark inquest into his brother's death, not one has yet to be implemented. The inquest was seen as an opportunity to transform the system and has instead failed to usher in that transformation. So again, we still have people suffering from mental health issues that are in provincial custody, in conditions of confinement that are inhumane and that are not suited to helping and supporting folks with mental health issues. Les also reminded us that the TRC recommendations to transform the carceral system have likewise not been heeded, have not been followed up. He pointed to Indigenous over-incarceration, which federally 30% of prisoners are Indigenous compared to 4% of the general population. This is a clear sign. Les noted that something is not working, something is not right. And Les also really powerfully connected the current prison expansion plans to historical mechanisms of colonization, right? In sequestering, institutionalizing Indigenous people. So the recent bills that are being proposed, including Bill 5, the prison expansion plans, this is all a far cry from reconciliation, from the TRC recommendations, completely contrary to the spirit of the TRC. Instead, we're looking at increased policing, criminalization, and institutionalization of Indigenous people, and also, as Pam noted, folks who are disabled, folks who have mental health issues. There's a disproportionate impact on those who are already marginalized members of society. So again, prison expansion, not just it's not tough on crime, it's tough on taxpayers, and not just tough on taxpayers, it's toughest on those most marginalized members of society. Truly a broken system and truly something that we need to confront. So on that note, we heard about some great alternatives. Andrea mentioned needing to address the root issues behind crime, right? Needing to properly fund and resource our schools and communities, needing to take up evidence-based, fiscally responsible mechanisms and social infrastructure. And again, to loop this back to the costs of jail infrastructure, the additional $214.5 million that Ford is proposing for prison expansion, that's again on top of existing operation costs. So we could take that money and have 1,600 new prison beds, or we could hire over 2,000 teachers or almost 5,000 early childhood educators. So really, what we need to be asking ourselves is, where do we want to allocate our money? How do we want to allocate our money? And what is in the best interest, truly in the best interest of keeping our communities safe and truly in the best interest of society in general? So I'll stop there for now. That's my quick recap. And we're going to open the floor for questions. So we've got opportunity for questions to come in either via folks who are attending over Zoom, or if you're watching the live stream on YouTube, feel free to pop a question into the chat as well. Okay, and while we're waiting for questions, I'll just pick up another thread that Pam introduced that I think is really important and also connects with the lived experience that Vanessa brought to us today, which is this entrenched culture of disregard for human dignity. No institutional accountability, right? We've got inquests, and yet the system hasn't changed. Deaths in custody, rates of deaths in custody increase. All right, we've got one question here from Lana Hall. Do we know what the next steps are on the province's end for prison expansion? Is anything imminently in the works? So Justin, I'm going to direct this question to you, but if anyone else wants to jump in, you can put your hand up as well, Justin.
Okay, I'll just I'll share the table that I had out previously during my remarks that I briefly referred to. So, in terms of ongoing projects, there's the intermittent center retrofit at the Toronto South Detention Center that the government has not yet shared what that is costing all of us. And that's projected to open in 2026. And then there's the Thunder Bay Correctional Complex, a $1.2 billion, 345 bed facility that's set to open in the fall of 2026. So those are ones that are nearing completion in addition to the ones that were recently completed at the Kenora Jail, the Thunder Bay Correctional Center, and the Intermittent Center retrofit of the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center in London, Ontario. The government recently announced that it would be expanding the Niagara Detention Center by 50 beds, the Vanier Center for Women by 50 beds, and as well, there was news about this in 2023, but they also confirmed a contract had been signed for the conversion and expansion of the Cecil Facer Youth Center into a women's jail. And all those projects should be coming online if they are built around or before 2028. One thing that I do want to mention that hasn't been picked up on, I don't think, in the media and the public discussion around jail expansion in this province, is that a number of these projects are destined to incarcerate women. Okay. So we're living in a context where our social safety net has been in decline for several decades. That's only become further compounded under the Ford government. You know, inflation's gone through the roof, yet OW, ODSP rates have remained stagnant, not kept up with inflation. They have not raised the rates. And so what that does is contributes to the feminization of poverty because women are disproportionately treated unequally in our society, more likely to require social supports. And when that doesn't go up, folks do look for other ways to survive. And so, in addition to this feminization of poverty, we're now seeing the criminalization and incarceration of that poverty as well. And you see these increases, for instance, these projects at the Vanier Center for Women, 50 beds. The conversion of a youth detention center into a women's jail in Sudbury, 50 beds. The Quinte Detention Center, they're adding 66 beds. Who are they for? They're for women. And we could go on and on and on. The government needs to disclose how many of these projects are designated for men versus women, I think, because I think it illustrates the degree to which the population of criminalized and incarcerated women is going up in this province and indeed in this country. And so when I'll just finish quickly here, when Premier Ford says, I don't care about the quote unquote criminals, I'm going to build as many jails as is needed. I don't think people in their minds think to themselves, oh, we're going to be locking up a bunch of women. But that's what this government's doing. They're locking people up that are being pushed to the margins disproportionately. They're also doing things like Bill C5 or Bill 5, where they're putting people who are homeless, people who are using drugs in public, instead of giving them supports, building more supportive housing, they're building cages. And that's disproportionately who's going to end up in there. So when we think about how do we make our communities safer, we need to be investing in supporting people, not doing this costly, fiscally irresponsible, ineffective approach, and certainly not a feminist approach. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Justin. And I think when we're talking about costs as well, so important to note as Pam spoke to, that prisons are disabling institutions, right? The experience of incarceration, as Vanessa spoke so powerfully to, is one where physical health, mental health, your social health, your social networks, right? Your opportunities for the future. Prisons are such debilitating institutions that also then has a downstream cost on society and on taxpayers, as well as a very real human cost, right? And that's where I want to loop back to Les Harper's framing as the harm reduction outlook as one of love. And I think that is an important thing to hold on to as we're thinking about approaches to community safety that are actually viable, that are actually going to work. So do we have any other questions coming in? We've got a couple of journalists in the room. We've got folks on live stream. Feel free to pop in the chat or raise your hand and you can ask your question out loud. Yeah, and great visual here that Justin's put up on the screen. We can see what the average cost is of, for example, drug treatment and recovery. Average annual cost per person, that's $20,000, right? Versus $134,000 to lock someone up in a provincial jail, where they're most likely going to be double bunked, where they will probably be locked into a cell if they're remanded to pretrial detention without access to programming, without access to meaningful activity, without access to timely healthcare, timely mental health care. Yeah. So really great to be able to look at the numbers and again, ask ourselves, and we should be asking our government, how can you justify spending this to put someone in a jail cell versus harm reduction, drug treatment recovery, etc. Okay, so we're at 11 a.m. I'm wondering if we should wait a few more moments for questions. I'll give another minute perhaps before we wrap up in case anyone's collecting their thoughts. Okay, so while folks are thinking, feel free to jump in if you do have a question, but I do want to get us back to the Coalition Against Proposed Prisons and the No Ontario Prison Expansion campaign. So the campaign was launched on August 27th, this past August 2025, and we've got so far 55 groups and organizations that have signed on. I'll read out the names of those groups, but I'd like to thank all of those groups for endorsing the campaign and also encourage other groups, other organizations to sign on. You can sign on via the Google form that's available at www.capontario.ca. If you're an individual and you're looking to get involved to help support the campaign, please do follow us on Instagram and stay tuned. We'll have more information on how to support us. And here are the organizations that we've got signed on so far. We've got the ASILU Collective, the Barton Prisoner Solidarity Project. We have Black Legal Action Center, Black Lives Matter Canada, Black Lives Matter Ngongjik Wanong. We have Boxes for Our Sisters, Canadians Friends, Service Committee, Carleton Public Interest Research Group, CFCR Prison Radio, the Coalition Against More Surveillance, the Council of Elizabeth Fry Societies of Ontario, the Criminalization and Punishment Education Project, the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, Elizabeth Fry Society of Northwest Ontario, Elizabeth Fry Society Simcoe Muskoka, the Encampment Support STC, Equity Network, Fight Back KW, Hamilton Encampment Support Network, Harm Reduction Action Collective, HIV Legal Network, Homes Not Bombs, Incarcerated Voters of Ontario, Inside Out Books, the Journal of Prisoners on Prisons, Justice for Anthony Oust, Justice for Solly, the Lakehead Socialist Club, New Harlem Productions, Niagara Movement School, Niagara Reproductive Justice, Ottawa Transformative Justice Collective, Paysan, Pen to Paper, Planning for Abolition, Policing Free Schools, the P4W Memorial Collective, Prison Health Research Council, Prisoner Correspondence Project, Prisoner Legal Supports, Punch Up Collective, CAR, Radical Care Collective, Rittenhouse A New Vision, St. Leonard's Society of Canada, Thrive HIV Prevention and Support, Thunder Woman Healing Lodge Society, and the Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction. I've got a few more names I'll read out, and then I'll turn it over to Les. I can see your hand. Toronto Metropolitan University Legal Clinic, Tracking Injustice, Voices for Unhoused Liberation, Wild Seed Center for Art and Activism, Right On, and 613819 Black Hub. All right. Les, the floor is yours. Oh, unless, yep, there you are. Go for it.
Hi. One of the things I was, when I was hearing at the end, they were talking about incarceration of women. One of the biggest thing is 50% of women incarcerated are Indigenous. And that is a huge, huge margin of a group of people that is affected. And many things are not done in the ways of helping Indigenous women in the way they need or want to be helped. They are brought into things that here, this is something that you can do to better yourself. No, there's not a cultural base outlook of programming, elders, knowledge keepers, workers, and enough in these places of incarceration where usually there's only like one person, one liaison doing all this work for all these people. You imagine all those women that must be in there doing, that need that help. Just want to say that.
Thank you so much, Les. That's a really important piece to bear in mind. Yeah. And again, I'm reminded of the staggering statistics of 85.6% of prisoners remanded to pretrial custody in Ontario. So thinking about 50% of incarcerated women are Indigenous, and of those, the vast majority are awaiting sentencing without access to, as Les noted, without access to culturally appropriate supports, programming, etc., really under-resourced. And during a time of great anxiety as well, awaiting sentencing, waiting to find out what will happen, and in increasingly inhumane conditions of confinement. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. Thank you for everybody who has attended, media journalists, as well as general public streaming on YouTube. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to learn more about why Ford's prison expansion plan is not a good plan, what the alternatives are, how we might better spend taxpayer dollars to ensure that we have a safe community. Safe and supportive. Okay. And thank you so much to all of our speakers for coming and sharing your expertise, your experience, and your perspective.